Welcome back, everybody. We have talked about the southern border so much since the inception of the show, but particularly the last few months, and that is for good reason. From the superficial easing of illegal immigration thanks to Secretary Mayorkas' CBP One app, aka concierge service, to the ongoing threats of foreign nationals who could be planning a terrorist-style attack on our homeland. And our next guest is a former DEA Special Operations Director who has been sounding the alarm on the fentanyl crisis for a very long time. Derek Maltz has testified in front of Congress countless times. He's held rallies in front of the Chinese embassy, and he's going to help a very powerful organization by the name of the Lost Voices of Fentanyl host their third annual rally in Washington, D.C. this September, an event that is so vitally needed. Director Maltz, welcome back to the show. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Amanda and John. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, good to be with you.
Let's hit right off the top this event happening in September, because oftentimes for various issues, whether it's immigration, abortion, Americans like to travel to Washington, D.C. for their voices to be heard. And I can't think of a more vital issue for Americans to travel and send their voices to Capitol Hill than this one.
Well, thank you. On September 23rd of this year, the third annual Lost Voices of Fentanyl rally will take place on the lawn, and then we'll march over to the White House. And this is about an army of families around America that basically are taking action in their own hands because they don't see action from the government, and they're trying to educate everyone so they could save lives. So they're really, really awesome, courageous families that are trying to do the right thing. But to be honest, they're very disgusted at the lack of action, especially on the education front from the administration.
Yeah, it is so remarkable how much the American public has learned about fentanyl in the last 3 years. And of course, all the work you've done with families who've lost loved ones to bring that to bear is incredible. Two of the most senior members of the Senate, Senator Grassley, Senator Feinstein, have been able to get a proclamation that this August 21st will be Fentanyl Prevention and Awareness Day. How important is it to have an entire day focused exactly on the danger that is now flowing across our border?
John, very important. And I got to tell you, very emotional for the families because they've been working all over the country with nonprofits, putting up billboards, educating schools and communities. And for them to finally see that the Senate voted unanimously with this resolution, it was very, very rewarding because they put in so much effort. This is all on their own time and, their money that they're raising. And it was awesome to hear from Andrea Thomas because she called me because she was actually in tears when she saw the final resolution.
Wow. Amazing.
Derek, that's incredible. I want to press in on the education aspect of this because I think you're right. I think that that's one of the most important things that we can do to alleviate this crisis. I remember back in the 80s and 90s when AIDS was declared a public health crisis, and they were beating it down our throats. Why the different treatment with it?
Well, that's a great question. I think that this administration is very deceptive. A good example is I give them credit because they're using social media influences to push out their public campaign messages, which they get a 10+ from my perspective. But my question has been, and I actually said this at the Congress hearing, why can't they use those same social media influences to educate all these people in America? Because the young kids are not watching mainstream media. They're not watching podcasts. They're not watching cable news, but they are watching the reels on their Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok. So these influences could really be amazing for education, just like professional athletes, celebrities, and role models. But the White House is not interested.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They're not. Derek, when Amanda introduced you, she said something interesting because she said you spent some time outside the Chinese embassy. A lot of people say, well, why would he do that? This is a Mexican drug cartel problem. But it isn't, right? China, this is part of a China initiative to destabilize America, to create these precursors, get them, and by the way, increasingly lethal precursors, get those ingredients to the Mexican cartels who then traffic them across. Tell us about the China link here and why it keeps getting swept under the rug by this administration and, quite frankly, by a lot of people in Congress.
Well, for one, I think the Chinese issue is so complex. People with inexperience are not comfortable in handling it. But, John, let me tell you this. in around 2008, when I was the head of the Special Operations Division, I started seeing the first signs of a chemical weapon attack on our country when we started seeing synthetic cannabinoids and cathinones, K2 spice bath salts coming out of these labs in Wuhan, China, and other locations. And all these Americans were getting sick, dying, emergency room admissions, poison control centers. No one knew what it was. Then around 2012, the same kind of labs started sending fentanyl on the websites, from purchases that people were requesting in America. So we started seeing a lot of heroin overdoses reported, but in fact, it was fentanyl. Right. So we started getting very suspicious. And then now you know what's going on. It's an absolute disaster. But China was smart. They started turning over the precursors so the Mexican cartels can make their own poison, and their fingerprints wouldn't be directly on the deaths of Americans. Well, guess what? Just like Mike McCall said at a recent event that I went to, the greatest foreign policy for China is to sell fentanyl to America. But now, John, they're producing more lethal drugs like nitazene, eternitazene, isonitazene, and even using this animal tranquilizer called xylazine that they're now mixing all over the country. It's been found all over the country. You don't have to be an expert, John, to understand This is a threat and an attack on our country and our kids.
Yeah, that it is.
Derek, we have reported on a couple different things, or actually just this week, that are problematic solutions to a problem that should never exist. The first one would be the fact that the FDA has now approved a second OTC drug for the opioid crisis, obviously including fentanyl. And another one is the inception of a NATSEC program that I think they're calling travel vetting, where they are going to more closely scrutinize and vet illegal immigrants coming across our border, which is great, but we all know that American citizens will get wrapped up in that. Both of those are solutions to a problem that could be completely taken care of if the border was shut down. But why are we spending so much money on solutions to fix a problem that would much more easily be fixed with half the price, just shutting down the border?
Well, great question. But if you don't mind, I want to go back to China for 1 second because it's very important. Even Chris Wray has warned America how China is the biggest national security threat to our country. But then does the American public realize that in 9 months this year, we've seen a 7,500% increase from 2 years ago with Chinese nationals, a lot of them military-age men coming into our country, apprehended by Border Patrol. So this is really alarming that everyone should care about. But getting back to your question, number one, I totally am in favor of pushing out any solution that's going to save kids' lives. So these new drugs that are available, great. But you're 100% right. When you look at this problem, it's a self-inflicted wound. And you know what, Amanda, I'm going to ask you a question because I'm not a genius from Harvard and I'm not this intellectual guy. But here's the thing. What's the logic when they took over the U.S. leadership on national security that they would immediately reverse all of these policies that were working, like remain in Mexico, right? For example, the catch and release, that's a disaster. Releasing all these people that are filing these false asylum claims, which is giving the cartels more revenue sources. Now it's sex trafficking, human trafficking, off the charts, drug trafficking, poisoning of our country. But here's the thing. These people coming in, they're not really legitimate asylum seekers. No. I mean, if you listen to Rodney Scott, the former Border Patrol chief, he said it perfectly. You could safely say anyone who went through the extra effort to avoid Border Patrol, they're not asylum seekers. So why are we not talking about the 1.7 million gotaways? And why doesn't the DHS leadership authorize the release of these very troubling, alarming, and important numbers? To me, they're the most important statistic that no one really knows because we're getting it only because there's leaks coming out of great American patriots that are trying to do great for our country. But the leadership's not letting the public understand the difference between gotaways and these poor people that are just trying to get here for a better life. And that's the problem I have. They're causing confusion to the public when, in fact, leadership is supposed to eliminate confusion.
That's right. I know. And I fear it's only going to get worse. But Derek Maltz, with you sounding the alarm on all of this, participating in these events and these initiatives, I know that you are making a difference. We appreciate you being here, sir. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.